Welcome back, everyone. Glad you could join me here today on our Total Wellness Tuesday, where the topic is going to be a public health warning on how even the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and many organizations around the world are now saying, finally and definitively, that glyphosate and certain herbicides are probable to cause cancer. They call it a carcinogenic-based risk. They've known about this now for decades. I'm going to actually share the information with you today that they've basically been holding back for over 30 years. So this is why I do shows like this. Not because I think that we should all run and hide in fear, but there's always something that we can do. And you have to be so careful in order to not believe everything that you read. Because when you start to understand that there are 2 lobbyists for every single one congressperson, you have to understand that these people are making all of these backdoor deals. And I'll actually share with you one of those deals that was made in order to be able to allow these mega conglomerate corporations to continue to push through, even as there are thousands of lawsuits against them in all sorts of different harm and wrongful death. So why do I share this with you? Because again, I think we have to be careful at just trusting and believing everything that we read in the media and assuming they have our best interest at heart. I don't believe that they do. I just don't. I believe that media is run by advertisers, and those advertisers are the people that can pay the most fees. Well, who can pay the biggest fees? The largest companies in the world, and nobody can compete with them, right? So it's kind of one of the reasons why you go to your downtown, and especially in like a Boston or New York or Chicago or even over in Europe, whether you're in Paris or whatever, you just see banks everywhere or real estate offices everywhere. And the reason is they can just pay more than everybody else. Like that's just the bottom line. And so when it comes to media, okay, well, just Pfizer or Bayer or any of these large pharmaceutical agencies, Monsanto, they can just pay more than everybody else. And guess what? If they pay the most money, guess what they're not going to find on the news about them? Anything negative. Because are you really going to bite the hand that feeds you? I mean, like realistically, that's probably not going to happen. Because then you lose what? You lose all of the ad revenue from them. And that's not easy to replace from a huge conglomerate like that. So what does that mean? Well, they just, hush, hush, little behind the scenes handshake that they're just not going to say anything. Because again, they are a business. They are not a nonprofit. And by the way, we have to be careful with all these nonprofits as well, because these nonprofits are very profitable. Like again, if you've ever looked into nonprofits, you'd see that sometimes 10% of those funds actually go to the organization, which is, in my opinion, deplorable. But that's neither here nor there. What we want to do is talk about real things for real people so that we, as a global health community, continue just to support each other, help each other. That's what it's all about. And there are things that you can do, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. So if you've never heard about glyphosate, it is literally the largest farming-based, we'll call it pesticide, but herbicide-based spray that you could put on your crops. I have a whole show on what's the difference between an herbicide, pesticide, fungicide, etc. So I'll link up to that today. So just literally all the research, because everything is researched. Everything will be linked up for you at stephencabral.com/2335. If you want to type that in, it will take you right to today's show notes and my big 3 takeaways. Okay, so glyphosate is basically sprayed on crops in order to be able to kill weeds that will take the water that's desperately needed and nutrients as well from the soil. It will keep bugs and other pests away as well. It's not the only thing that it does, but used in conjunction with like what's called Ready Roundup or Roundup Ready is one of those main things. So this came out in, I believe, 1974 from Monsanto. Before, excuse me. Before that, do keep in mind, they were producing other harmful products like DDT, etc., with a slew of lawsuits. I think there was like over 8,000 lawsuits on them. They come out with a new product, and it's hailed as like, this is the thing because it's going to allow you to produce more crop, which, again, is amazing. I'm not saying that that's not great. It is. Here's the issue. Massive side effects, right? I've talked about the massive side effects before. I'll link those up. But let me give you some of them right now, and then I'll start to get more into it, okay? So 2015, This was talked about over 20 years ago. I'll link that up as well. But the World Health Organization, an international agency for research on cancer, published a summary in March 2015 that classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen in humans. That means it probably causes cancer. The possible cancers it's linked to from glyphosate exposure include non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, renal tubule carcinoma, so kidney-based issues, and pancreas issues with pancreatic cell adenoma, and skin cancer tumors as well. Okay, so we have that right there, right? Biggest organization in the world. Why does this matter? Let me share with you exactly why it matters. I'll give you the paragraph. This is the exact quote. Government agencies have done little to staunch the flow of glyphosate. The Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Food and Drug Administration have always had close ties to the agrochemical. That means basically agriculture mixed with chemicals. Companies like Monsanto and Dow Chemical pressure the agencies to greenlight their products and suppress critical data. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has hardly studied glyphosate at all. Its only review of data in 1985, okay, so 85, I was wrong. That's actually what? 95, 205, 15, almost 40 years ago, right? So they knew this almost 40 years ago. They came up with an assessment of possible risk, basically the same one that came out in 2015, right? So 30 years before that, they already knew. But subjected to a slew of Monsanto-produced studies, meaning like a company did its own studies on its own product. I mean, I don't know about you, but that seems like a conflict of interest. Due to a great deal of pressure, that's the lobbyist that I spoke about before, it revised its statement. Literally, a private company or publicly traded company made the Environmental Protection Agency, which is supposed to be separate and clean from everything, it made it revise its judgment. 6 years later to evidence of non-carcinogenicity to humans, meaning like, oh, it's not carcinogenic to humans. Well, we know that it is. But now we didn't find out till 30 years later. By the way, again, we knew in 85. Like, that's the latest. So who's holding the Environmental Protection Agency liable, right? Like, when it comes to misinformation or what do you call it, fake news, like, who's holding these people? Who's holding the government, right? Who's holding them accountable? So there is no, like, I just don't understand this. It's not fair to humans that are eating these foods and potentially getting cancer, right? Probably getting cancer. It's probable carcinogenic risk, okay? So that's the issue, and it doesn't stop right there because, again, people are eating these from foods they eat, conventionally sprayed foods. They are getting them in water-based sources. They're getting it in rain-based water, believe it or not, and this is pretty wild, and this is not a good thing at all. But they've found that even some organic products, especially grains, have trace amounts of glyphosate, even though they're organic, which means they can't use glyphosate. How is this possible? Well, the winds will take these seeds, and then Monsanto, believe it or not, sues these farmers for using their seeds, even though the farmers aren't using them. They don't want to use them, but they're blowing onto their property. But what also happens is that these things seep into the soil. Okay, they can stay there for 20 years, which is wild, but also the wind just blows as they're spraying into other farmers' crops. So you have to be careful as to, like, is your produce near a conventional farm? And that's pretty wild to think about. You having to figure that out. And what's even crazier is that they're finding it in bee honey and all the different great bee products that you can get, right? Royal jelly, propolis. We've talked about these things before. So I don't know if propolis is part of that. Yes. And I was thinking pycnogenol, all these peas sticking to my head. So what I want to share with you is this, is like, it's not necessarily even the farmer's fault. Like, they're not doing anything wrong. It's that these things are just, it's so pervasive in our environment. I read that it started out in 95 at 40 million pounds of glyphosate was in use. And by 2014, it's now 276 million pounds of glyphosate is sprayed around, at least in the US, that might be potentially the world. It's unbelievable. And to even make matters worse, they're figuring out, they found, and again, this might have been in the 80s. I know it was somewhere in the 80s. It was shortly after the release in 74. They actually found a certain bacterium, a bacteria that survived all of this toxicity. And they're like, whoa. Like this bacteria is actually surviving because how glyphosate works is, or Roundup works is they use a surfactant, which allows the chemical, because it's a chemical, to seep into the plant, and the plant absorbs it and just destroys it right down to the roots. And so they found a bacteria that actually survived in all of the sludge around these testing grounds. And they use that to actually genetically modify soy so that soy could just be heavily sprayed with it. It wouldn't break down the soy, but it would break down all the other weeds. I mean, it's unbelievable. So now people, and again, keep in mind, people consume massive amounts of soy. And over 90% of all soy, over 90% of all corn is genetically modified. If you don't know about what genetically modified means, genetically modified organism. And so I'm going to link up a show on what GMO foods are, all right? Because I'd love you to learn about that next. So just go to StephenCabral.com/2335. Obviously, all of these shows are completely free, and if they're ever valuable, I just hope that you'll just share the information with other people. That's really what this is all about. Subscribe to the show if you can. Share the information. That's the only way these things get out. Okay, besides cancer, though, I had to share this with you as well. Studies have also indicated that glyphosate disrupts the microbiome in human intestines, causing a decrease in the ratio of beneficial to harmful bacteria. Thus, so I'm just quoting, highly pathogenic bacteria such as Salmonella, Clostridium are highly resistant to glyphosate. So the bad bacteria that we have is more resistant, but the beneficial bacteria such as Enterococcus and Bacillus and Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus were found to be moderately to highly susceptible. What does this mean? Basically, it means almost like an antibiotic, but antibiotics not necessarily preferential. This glyphosate is preferential for killing good beneficial bacteria, and it leaves the harmful stuff. So when I'm reading a lab like the bacterium parasite stool test, which is the main one, or maybe I'm reading a Candida metabolic and vitamins test, and I see someone just continually to show up high for Clostridia, I'm like, what is going on here? Why is this happening? It might be prudent to actually run another lab, which is called the environmental toxicity test. You can find all these labs, by the way, at StephenCabral.com/labs. You can run them with your favorite naturopathic doctor or integrative health practitioner level 2, or you can run them with the team over at Equilife, your choice. But they all can be run at home. But you can actually test to see if you have elevated levels of pesticides in your body. So it might be worth testing. Again, if you seem to have these like multiple chemical sensitivities, ongoing gut issues, it might be worth testing for sure. Skin rashes, migraines, etc. All right. So we talked about that, how it can affect other parts of the body as well. That includes the gut. But I wanted to name a few other possible correlations. So literally it's titled, Other Disease Instances with High Correlations, but again, not proven. I'm doing that in air quotes if you're watching this on video. They include high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes, obesity, lipoprotein metabolism disorder, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, so IBD, intestinal infections, end-stage renal disease, acute kidney failure, cancers of the thyroid, liver, bladder, pancreas, kidney. So cancers of the thyroid, cancers of the liver, cancer of bladder, cancer of pancreas, cancer of the kidneys, and myeloid leukemia. So all of these correlations are there, but they're not necessarily causations, we have to say. They should raise concern, though, over the use of this chemical, which seems to be affecting all life here on Earth. So what do? Well, I still believe, again, we have to continue to, of course, eat, right, as humans, but what should we do? We should really be following that Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen guide. If you've never heard about that before, we'll link that up as well. Easy one to follow. If you can't afford to buy all organic, what should you do? Well, the ones that are the Clean 15, you can buy non-organic. The dirty dozen should just never be eaten. Just never eat them, no matter how good you think the food is, or they should be bought organic. That's the bottom line. And again, I know that it's not fair, right? Because it costs more to buy organic. But, buy then the organic ones that are on the dirty dozen. And for the conventional, if you need to, or the clean 15, buy those conventional if you need to. Your fruits and vegetables should still be washed. Okay, I have a do-it-yourself fruit wash if you want to check that one out, and you can certainly buy store-based fruit and veggie washes as well. Be careful buying those grains. Just make sure, if you can, that your wheat, if you're buying wheat, I'm a proponent of being more gluten-free for sure, and if you're buying your oats, if you can, just see if they can be tested for glyphosate. Like if the company you're purchasing from, do they test for glyphosate? I think that would be nice to see. When in doubt, organic is obviously the best for your grains. So that's that. If you're buying honey, if possible, if they test for it, again, not everybody can do this because it's very expensive to test for these things. So you can check that out. Now, some good news for you. Again, organic is going to be your best way to go. You can test for this to see if you actually have it. And if you don't have a lot of these build up, then great. Then it's not as much to be worried about, which we love to see. So, and I talked about that. Those are just at stephencabral.com/labs. But the silver lining in all of this is that the glyphosate seems to be coming to an end. Not overnight. Obviously, it's a huge moneymaker for these companies, so they need to replace it with something. But the problem is they don't want to get rid of it, but it's creating these super weeds, all right? So you might have heard before about super bugs. So they're antibiotic resistant because we're giving so many antibiotics to so many people unnecessarily. Hopefully you caught my Friday review podcast just a few weeks back. 1/3 of all children are given antibiotics. So a third of the times children are prescribed antibiotics is for a non-appropriate case, which is then leading to more asthma, allergies, and other gut-based issues, which can then affect every single disease in their body, right? So we know that. But antibiotic use, the more you use them, the less effective they become. But also these super bugs begin to grow that are antibiotic resistant. Why? Because these pathogens are living as well. So they need to develop and evolve in ways to get around antibiotics. Well, guess what? After 40 years or so, these weeds are developing that are untouched by glyphosate, and they're so strong that they're actually destroying a lot of the farmland, and believe it or not, strong enough to destroy the farming machines as well. So, of course, farmers are not too happy. So what are they going to do? Well, develop new machines or develop a new type of Roundup or even stronger. Again, like just it's getting a little out of control. So there's that I wanted to share with you. And the big thing, though, is that more and more people are voting with their dollars, which is really what matters. They're choosing to purchase more organic whenever possible. They're choosing to go to local farmers markets and support their local farmers that are not using these types of glyphosate and pesticide and herbicide-based sprays. So that is the absolute best thing that you can do. Get to know your local farmers, purchase from them whenever possible, purchase organic whenever possible, choose the clean 15 whenever you can't purchase organic. Don't eat the dirty dozen if you cannot eat all organic in that particular way. And don't fall for the next media-based thing that you hear this, global, huge corporation is somehow doing something to save humanity, like, by the way, glyphosate was said to do 40 years ago. This is going to end famine. This is going to help increase crop load. Sure, yeah, it is for soy, for corn, for a few other things, but not for, the global use and benefit of eating a healthy diet. So I just wanted to share that with you. Again, there's always things that we can do. I know we can do it. Share this information with other people. We're going to get there. Keep pushing. Take care, everyone.